Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Dark Reading webinar, Securing Tomorrow Today, How to Navigate Zero Trust. It's sponsored by Blue Mantis and broadcast by Informa. My name is Peter Krass. I'm with Dark Reading. I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I have a few quick announcements. First of all, this webinar is designed to be interactive. There's a dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen, and that will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, share this webinar on social media, and participate in the Q&A session that we'll have toward the end of the webinar. The slides will advance automatically, no need to click. You can also download a copy of the slides via the resources widget. Toward the end of today's webinar, I'll ask you to complete a feedback survey. And I hope you'll do this before you leave us. The feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve these events in the future. Finally, if you have any technical issues during this webinar, a couple of things you can do. One, click the widget that's found at the bottom of your screen, the help widget, excuse me, or just type your issue right into the Q&A. And either way, we'll be glad to offer you one-on-one assistance. All right. That's it for the announcement. So let's move on to our presentation, Securing Tomorrow Today, How to Navigate Zero Trust. And we have three very fine speakers for you today. Mario Broom, Vice President of Practice Areas and Technical Advisory Service at Blue Mantis. We've got Jay Martin. He's the Chief Information Security Officer, also at Blue Mantis. And Don Lenz, Senior Director of Security Transformation, also at Blue Mantis. If you'd like to learn more about our speakers, you'll find their bios in the speaker bio widget that's at the bottom of your screen. And again, if you'd like to ask a question for the Q&A, just use that Q&A area that's on the right side of your screen. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Mario Broom. Mario, take it away.
Peter, thank you so much. And good day, everyone. You know, Zero Trust security represents a significant shift in cybersecurity by discarding traditional perimeter-based approaches with a trust no one focus, even within customers' networks. The journey towards implementing a zero trust framework is not just about technology. It's in fact a fundamental deviation from traditional security, emphasizing continuous verification in adoption of least privileged access. Today, we're going to take a look at strategies and experiences in this journey, and we absolutely hope that you participate along the way in this particular process. And with that, just a quick introduction from our two speakers, both Don Lenz and Jay Martin. Don, a little bit about you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mario. I'm Don Lenz, Senior Director of Security Transformation at Blue Mantis. And I regularly work with organizations, townships, cities, municipalities, and other types of corporations to implement information security programs, help them build information security programs. And oftentimes it's initiated with cybersecurity assessments, which we regularly conduct, and then we provide guidance and help to those entities. Thank you, Mary.
Nice. Thank you, Don. Jay Martin, what say you, sir?
Hey everybody, Jay Martin. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer over here at Blue Mantis. I've been in cybersecurity for longer than I want to realize or mention. Yeah, you know, we're here to help our customers protect and, you know, defend against cyber attacks and, you know, establish a good business resilience within their organizations. And part of that starts with a good zero trust program that we'll discuss with you today.
Yeah, no, sounds great. Jay and Don, so the old question, what is zero trust?
Yeah. I'm going to move to the next slide because it gives the NIST 800-207 standard definition. But you know, I'll say one thing, right? This is zero trust means trust is never granted implicitly, right? And continually evaluated as, you know, users come in and out of different applications and such. But to me, right, zero trust is kind of like a business strategy, okay? Mario, I know not a lot of of my peers talk about it being at the business level, but when you look at what Zero Trust brings to the organization, how invasive it is, and how many pieces of the organization need to be aligned with IT and cybersecurity, you're really bringing in the whole organization, right? So it has to be from that top-down approach to cybersecurity. And it's really a way to organize, like I like to say, your defense in depth strategy in a very cohesive, central way, right? So we can get into a little more what that means later. But, I'll turn over to Don.
Yeah, I mean, 100%, Jay. It's a paradigm shift where we're no longer just protecting the perimeter. In days gone by, and even in some organizations, once you get onto the network, you have full access to everything. And that's not the Zero Trust methodology, where you need to confirm access everywhere, not just once you're on the network, but access to all devices, applications needs to be confirmed and validated throughout your entire stay when you're accessing the environment.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny, Don. You just hit on it, right? In the traditional sense, you're in a brick and mortar building at work. You plug into your network, or you connect to the internal wireless, and you're on the network, and you have pretty much access to your data center, your applications, right?
Right.
Well, guess what? So do the bad guys, right?
Exactly.
And that's how they get in, right? If you look at an attack, kind of the way an attack layout works, one of the ways in is through phishing, right? I click on a link, erroneously download something, establish a man in the middle, they get my credentials, they can even get, if I'm using multi-factor authentication, guess what? In my session, if they hijack my session, they get the session token, right? So now they have my access, right? If I'm an administrator, even worse, right? Because now I can, I have access to broader systems and the ability maybe to mess around with your multi-factor authentication, what
Absolutely.
you use for multi-factor authentication, establish a secondary form of multi-factor authentication, and then move laterally and, data exfiltration and launch ransomware. And that's how the attacker works within the organization. So you spot on. How do you protect against that?
Yeah. That's true. And the bad actor is doing harm under your credentials, and you have to, if you have access to various folders and things, maybe you don't even know that you have access to certain databases or storage locations, whatever. Well, the bad actor will find those things and then do what they do: delete them, encrypt them, hold them for ransom, etc.
Yeah,
it's a scary world out there for sure. So how do customers actually start this trust, this journey along Zero Trust and make it actually practical to implement this?
Well, I think you want to go in. I just flipped the slide to the 3 core tenets. If you want to start there, Don.
Yeah. So you need to approach. You need to apply a risk-based approach, and following these core tenets. Zero Trust is all about applying least privilege as much as you can wherever you can, verifying access explicitly in all locations, and then you need to assume breach. A lot of organizations don't. They don't believe that they have been breached, but they are. And oftentimes nation states or bad actors, they will just sit there and lurk. They have access and they're waiting for an opportunity to strike, to maximize their profits.
Yeah,
so,
and the damage.
And the damage.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I know a lot of, go ahead, Don, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, so following these 3 core tenets, that's your initial strategy. And then from there, you can, Jay and I will talk about the next steps following that.
Yeah, and just Mario, just another, to rewind this a little bit too, is, when you look at something like assume breach, you have to think, and I do this all the time, right, within Blue Mantis, that a bad actor has already taken foothold. So how how do you act as a CISO, as an IT security person, a security analyst, whatever your role might be, to think about that, right? Think about the bad actors on my network. What do I do now? Well, you want to be able to monitor, right? You wanted to be able to see what that bad actor is doing, how they got in, if they're in, what, and what's going on. So think about security observability, right? Another part of this is, if you're going to assume breach, that means they've exfiltrated your data. Where are you storing that data? Is it encrypted? Do you have an immutable data store where you're doing backups off-site? So if they're on-site and they do decide to, just use a wiper application or ransom your data, that it's protected somewhere and you could recover it. And you've done a reasonable job at testing those backups and restoring those in a reasonable amount of time so that the business is prepared, right? And we'll get into a little more later about, business resilience, business impact analysis, and stuff like that. But as you unwind each of these three core tenets, think it through, right? Think about what that means to you with apply least privilege and verify explicitly. That's what we'd ask you to do. Yeah, we'll get into it a little more.
Yeah, you know what? This sounds expensive. No, and I say that kiddingly, but how do you communicate this to your executive leadership and even to the board of directors of how to get buy-in for what is a long journey, right? I don't think zero trust never ends, right? It's a continuous curve. So how do you communicate that?
So the board of directors is not going to understand that you're currently at TLS 1.1 and you need to move to TLS 1.3. They're not going to understand that, and other, maybe technology related things that have to be put in place, or gaps and deficiencies. What they do understand is risk to the business. So you have to map deficiencies and things that you need to do to safeguard the organization in terms of risks, and present those to the board of directors and executive teams as these are the risks that we currently have, and that they understand. And that will help drive roadmaps, plans, and their support of those roadmaps and plans.
Yeah, and I just to add to that, Don, if you look at, what are the business outcomes businesses are always looking at, right? They want to protect their brand, of course, right? Customer satisfaction, operational efficiency, things like that. How do you align some of those business outcomes? Maybe there's some compliance initiatives too up there, right? That they need to have as business outcomes. How do you align with those business outcomes when you're approaching a zero trust program and any security project, for instance, and align with those business outcomes? Yeah,
that's a great point. That's a great point. Because the risks are present to those outcomes. And you want to minimize the risks in order to achieve those outcomes.
Yeah. And I think, the other thing, Don and Mario, is that, maybe a couple of years ago, board of directors, executive leadership didn't understand the exposure to their organizations. And a couple of years ago, I really heard this from customers, like, well, the bad actors aren't going to attack me because what do I have? What do I have? They don't want me. They're going to move on to financial institute. But since then, they've, some of those organizations had to find out the hard way, right? Because they did get hit, and they've lost access to their systems and, weren't able to continue with business. So when those things happen, it's really a wake-up call. Nowadays, I think executive leadership and board of directors maybe are becoming a little numb to all the articles out there and all the noise about the breaches and the constant, PII that's being exfiltrated and our own personal information. So, I think you're getting in front of them and talking through what some of the implications are is, and what they're seeing from their peer organizations, who've recently gotten breached. Yeah, I don't know. That might lead to a dead end nowadays. That's what I'm thinking. So. Yeah, how do you make it real and align with those business outcomes? Long-winded way to say it.
Yeah, let me dig into that particular question then a little bit more, which is sort of clearly there's excuse me, how to communicate with ELT.
Yeah.
But then there's enabling ELT to communicate with board of directors as well, right? So,
Right.
empowering them to understand how to message this is, I would imagine, is also part of the education process that we need to, let our customers know, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyways. When an organization experiences an incident, it's one of the worst nightmares that you can imagine. When you don't have access to critical systems that are supporting ultra important processes that business needs to conduct, when those things are just disrupted, it's an awful event. And so it's critically important that all organizations, consider following a zero trust methodology to help safeguard the company from that awful experience.
Yeah, and Mario, I'm just going to flip the slide here. When Dawn talks about, and you talk about the journey, right? This really is the zero trust framework, right? This is based on CISO 2.0. We've modified it a little bit here at Blue Mantis based on what we feel was a few deficiencies within the CISO model, but pretty close anyway. You're talking about pretty much the whole digital landscape, right? Within an IT or in an enterprise, right? We're talking about identities, which is, how I log in, how I do multi-factor authentication, right? Access to SaaS applications, maybe different identity stores that you have to keep your arms around, right? Sometimes those identities are owned by the business because they brought in their own technology, yet they're not using password policies that you'd consider to be strong, right? Devices, do you have a BYOD environment? What are you using for devices? How are you hardening those devices?
Are you aware of all your devices? Are you tracking all your assets? If you're not tracking it, you can't secure it.
That's right. Yeah. Back to the previous slide. Network and infrastructure, that includes, your IoT, your physical data centers, and also your network devices and switches and routers and all that good stuff.
Firewalls. Yep.
Applications and workloads. Think about, some of those that you might have on-prem. SaaS applications included, maybe workloads that, DevOps teams are working on, right? Application development teams. How are you securing those in the cloud and beyond? And then data, right? Back to what we mentioned earlier. And then the foundations for this is, governance, risk, and compliance. What are you trying to protect? And what are those risks to the organization? What compliance and regulatory landscape are you under, and what do you have to, achieve? Is it PCI? Is it HIPAA high trust, right? SOC 2, right? SOC 2 type 2 stuff. Automation and orchestration. How are you ensuring that the policies that you develop, from your governance structure, get applied in an automated manner, right? Taking that human element out of it, and try to automate some of those policies, like remote access, like allowing BYOD or not BYOD, right? And that kind of stuff. And then finally, visibility and analytics. How are we reporting around our zero trust program? How are we reporting how well we're, tracking from a protect perspective through this framework? Aligning that with the executive leadership team, but also visibility around, my cybersecurity landscape, my monitoring to see if, bad actors are getting into my environment. Am I centralizing my logging to ensure that, any modifications to my firewall is tracked, right? And goes against your change management process, right? Things like that, right? Just that people don't think about. That's what this framework is all about.
Right. And to support this framework, we recommend that organizations put together a program, a zero trust program that includes a lot of these pillars and principles in areas.
Yeah.
Our program would include, as Jay just said, reporting, transparently reporting results, status, initiatives, all under, a governance, risk, and compliance methodology.
Yeah, so, look, facing the enormity of this journey, what are the top challenges that customers might face along the way, and how do they overcome all of disparate departments, different ways to communicate up and down the organization? Your perspective. What are some of those challenges that customers are going to face? By the way.
Yeah, I'll start here. Like, this is daunting, but what I'm going to say is that you've already started your zero trust journey. Whether you listening here know you're on that road or not, you're on that journey. Most of you have implemented some of the tools and technologies that prevent or protect these areas within this framework, right? Some of you do have policies, cybersecurity policies, right? Have adopted encryption and anti-malware, antivirus detection, EDR, right? Some of you are, using microsegmentation and protecting your networks, things like that. Some of you are scanning, your code before you release it, and making sure that there isn't any security or vulnerabilities within that code, right? So you're on your way.
Sure.
I would start there and take a deep breath, and that's one place. Some of the challenges, Dawn, I'll just say, like, how do I get started? If it was me, like, where do I start on the zero trust journey? I know I've done some things, but how do I get my head around what I've done and what gaps do I still have?
Right.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So oftentimes our customers immediately think, I'll just buy a tool. I've heard of the zero trust tool. I'm going to buy that tool, but unfortunately, there's no silver bullet. Zero trust is not about buying one tool for SSE or SASE, capabilities. The journey typically starts for organizations that are successful in implementing a zero trust program. It starts by conducting a cybersecurity assessment, an assessment of their overall security posture. Blue Mantis regularly does this with organizations, where we will come in and we will assess your overall cybersecurity posture and then present the detailed findings. And then our recommendations then would flow into a roadmap that you would be able to use to track your zero trust journey.
Okay.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'll just finish that, Mario, by saying that, if you don't like back to the first three core tenets, and underneath I had, if you don't know what normal is, if you don't know what's right, you can't protect it, right? And the only way to do that is to really understand what that landscape is, what you're trying to protect. And the best way to do that, like Dawn said, is do a cybersecurity risk assessment. Whether you use something like NIST, or if you're in a, again, PCI or HIPAA high trace, ISO 27000, if you're a global company, right, Dawn?
Right.
Start with one of those. Get a third-party opinion, an expert to come in and guide your organization through this starting point with the assessment, or do it yourself, right? Just start somewhere and start getting a list of where you think your gaps and deficiencies are. And then, like Dawn said, get it into a roadmap. And we have a zero trust roadmap, a maturity model that we've developed that tracks where you are against the CISO model, right? And this is a great way to show your executive leadership team how well you're doing against the model, but also what gaps you still have remaining for you and your teams, and to put into your budgets for the coming years. Again, this is a multi-year program. And one of the big things is, like Dawn said, where do you get started? Number two is, going back to how do you get money for this? We talked about that at the onset. That would be the second challenge, Mario. Again, how do you align that with the business outcomes of the organization and be able to sell that up? And number three is, not getting buy-in from the top level executives down. Because like I said before, to me, this is a business strategy. It's all of the organization rowing in the same direction. If you look at that model, you have to worry about HR onboarding, right? Onboarding people and offboarding people the right way, right? You have to worry about shadow IT. So businesses have a stake in this too, right? If they're bringing in a SaaS application that IT doesn't know about and they're not protecting it the right way and applying the least privilege use, right? And verify explicitly and assume breach tenants, that's exposure to the organization. So that top-down enforcement and then reporting back up is very critical.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And circling back, that's well said, Jay. Circling back to the initial assessment, that's where this journey typically starts for a lot of organizations. That establishes a baseline for your current state. If you don't understand what your current state is, or are not sure where you are, then you're not going to be able to track to a future state that is more secure. So
right. Yeah. For the audience listening, please feel free to ask any questions along those lines. And we do have a question from AJ. The question for the panel, who do you feel should be involved in a zero trust program? How do you include teams without bringing in too much noise that could disrupt the journey towards zero trust?
Mm-hmm.
Don, I'll let you kick this one off if you don't mind. I have my thoughts, but shoot.
Sure. So, well, certainly the IT organization plays a key role in the zero trust journey, but the executive team also needs to be included and participate in that journey. In order for them to, you need their buy-in, but also, of course, we recommend that you reach out to external sources as well, like Blue Mantis, where we can help you in that journey and help frame out exactly what that looks like and what should be done and the time frames, et cetera. So we are of course available to help you in that process.
The things I would add here, Don, is when you look at your gaps and you identify those gaps, you're gonna discover things you didn't know about your organization. I've been in so many assessments and engagements where the business will tell us one thing and IT will say something totally different. And then even amongst the IT folks, they'll argue, right? It's not like that. We have this subnet here and they can't get to that application. And lo and behold, everybody in the whole company can get to the data or the application, right? It's always, you always find out about yourself as you go through an assessment, right? So who should be involved? And how do you make it small? As you go through something like a NIST assessment and get into zero trust, you're going to uncover the groups as it unfolds, and you'll be guided as to which groups to bring in, right? For instance, if you're talking about network segmentation, you're going to be talking about your network one day. You want to bring in the network team, right? If you're talking about, access management, remote access, and things like that, you're going to want to start with your IT team, but you also have to figure out what other applications do we have that aren't directly under IT control. What are some of those business units that you bring in? And you separately bring them in, right? You don't have them in a big meeting with the IT team and the security team and the other business units, right, in your HR. When it comes time to talk about onboarding, offboarding, just get HR and anybody else that's part of that value stream or that work stream in those meetings about onboarding and offboarding, right? Take a look and dissect that. And last but not least, vendors, right? Your third parties, what do they have access to? Do they have access to PII information, intellectual property? Are they, part of your value chain in supporting your customers? And where do they play in, right? Do they have access to pieces of your network? If something happens to their environment, let's say business email compromise, could they, somehow convince that vendor or, an employee of that vendor to give up their username and password for access to a system in your environment, right? Think that through. Who needs to be involved in this, in that ecosystem? And then dissect it, put a timeline together and bring those people in as you need. So it's not too much noise. It's not too much. I hope that answered the question. It's not too long-winded.
No, thank you, Jay. Jay, you said a very interesting word a couple of minutes back. Use the word daunting. And so knowing that zero trust can be a daunting effort, how do customers tackle this large initiative, right? Almost to, AJ asking, almost identical question, but how this is a corporate wide initiative. How do customers handle this initiative?
Yeah, how do you eat the elephant, right?
Exactly.
One bite at a time, I suppose. I always hated that saying, right? I can never imagine eating an elephant, but it's just like that. And again, if you like, we do this all day, every day, so it's easy for me to say, start with a cybersecurity risk assessment, right? Because we've done this many, many times, and we know which teams to bring in at what point. And once you get to the end, this is about a 6 to 8 week process, Mario, that Dawn and team bring organizations through. And at the end, it's super clear on where your gaps are and where your deficiencies are.
Yep.
Right? There's kind of no more guesswork anymore, right? And it's kind of all out in the open. And sometimes organizations don't want to look at the deficiencies, but you have to, or the bad actors are going to find them for you. Mm-hmm. And that's typically how to make it less daunting, right? You carve it up, and then you create a prioritized roadmap based on the risks to the organization. And that's what goes in, that's what the zero trust maturity risk and roadmap, the why and the when part of the engagement is all about, right? It's really taking the cybersecurity gaps that we identify and really applying a risk to them, to your specific organization, because not all risks are the same, or not all gaps are the same risk in every organization, right? Sure. And then based on, and there's a few criteria, right? My skill sets, my budgets, my timelines, the risks of these gaps to my organization. You have to think about all those, and then it's quite easy once you lay them all out like that to say, all right, this is our highest risk. This is what we need to tag first. This is what we need to talk to our executive leadership about right away.
Right.
Thanks.
And well said. And remember, the old cliche, Rome wasn't built in a day. Neither is zero trust. So you have to, oftentimes there's low hanging fruit. There are many of the deficiencies might be easily remediated, so you can go after those as well. But as Jay said, also prioritize those efforts that reduce the risk the greatest to your organization.
Yeah, and excellent. Last but not least, show progress, right? Get some quick wins, right? Give each other high fives, right? Take each other out for a drink and celebrate. Pump those up to the executive leadership team. Hey, we had this on our zero trust roadmap. We told you how it was going to affect these business services and these business outcomes. We've been able to take that and remediate that risk. Wow, that's powerful, right? That's and this is through our zero trust program. So, highlight those across the IT organization and your cybersecurity groups, but also to the business and to the executive leadership, Be your own cheerleader. Yeah.
And with the zero trust program, that should work hand in hand with your risk register. If you don't have a risk register and risk management program, highly recommend that you instill that. So you're tracking for any deficiencies that have not been remediated on your journey to zero trust. Reflect the risks in your risk register that those deficiencies present, and of course roll those up to the executive team.
Well put.
Mm-hmm. Well, so wow. So many vendors in this space selling zero trust. So many vendors selling cybersecurity solutions. Again, another daunting task for customers to try to select through the myriad of all of this. How do customers begin that process of, finding the right partner in the business, finding the right, I hate to call them tools, because as kind of Don alluded to, there's no such thing as cybersecurity or cyber trust tools, but they make up the entirety of what the zero trust framework eventually becomes. But how do customers begin their selection process?
I'll start right here, Don.
Yep, go ahead.
This middle part right here, the zero trust maturity, risk, and roadmap, the why and the when, that allows us to work with organizations to define the technologies that are going to be used, not only the governance, risk, and compliance, and the the foundational aspects of that CISO model, but also the technology that can be used to close out those gaps. So once we do the what, right, the cybersecurity risk assessment, we're going to understand, or you're going to understand, what technologies you're currently using to plug those gaps, right, in the zero trust model, right, and to harden your identities, your devices, your data. Those all go into the zero trust maturity program, and you're able to see within there, Mario, the gaps that still remain based on the CISO model and based on your cybersecurity risk assessment. So if you're applying, like Don said, your risk register to all this, you're going to understand, all right, our highest risk is we don't have security observability. We're not centrally logging information from our firewalls, from our servers, and so on, and we don't have a SIM. Okay, let's talk about that, right? Let's talk about what technology might be applicable for use for you. And then taking that and putting it in a model like this, and I'll just skip to the next slide here, Mario, if that's okay.
Sure,
this is our Blue Mantis journey thus far, based on the CISO 2.0 model, right? And if you look up here in the left corner, and you notice for identities, we use maybe multiple technologies. That's okay. Defense in depth is a good thing, right?
That's right.
Some of these technologies cover a certain piece of the pillars, right, within the zero trust model, but maybe not enough, right? A vendor will, and vendors have done a total disservice to zero trust, right? They come in and they say, if you buy our product, we're zero trust compliant, you'll be fully zero trust. Bullshit, right? I'll say the BS word right here in public in front of all these attendees. It's not true, right? You have to look at those gaps that only that risk assessment and putting it in a model like we talked about in the previous slide, and then highlight it here in a logical diagram and understand, okay, what are we missing? Where are our gaps? This is our journey right now. You could take a look. There's a lot of technologies here. Sometimes we're a managed security service provider, So, I eat my own dog food, or I sip my own champagne, as my COO likes to say. And so we use our own managed services to monitor and observe our own infrastructure. So some of these are kind of outsourced to ourselves. And that's how we get around what this is. But, here's some technologies. I'll just throw that out here. I don't know if that answered the question, Mario.
And there are so many technologies, and you have to understand that Blue Mantis is working with so many partners and vendors. And we regularly, on a daily basis, make recommendations as to what technologies and/or third parties an organization should be using, because we hear from the market, we hear from customers across the country that they're having success with this and they're not having success with that. So we get that feedback, and then we use that, and we can then relay that information to you.
Perfect. I've been waiting for an audience question around AI, and look, a question from the audience. We have a SASE setup, but don't have dedicated in-house IT security. How does AI improve our ability to secure X Service Edge, improve the visibility?
Great question. Yeah, so I think we talked pre-show about this, right? I had AI select my fantasy football team, and I'm in second last place. I'm in second last place in the league. So the day I recommend AI to take over my cybersecurity platform is long away, Mario. Long away.
Oh, you're a traditionalist, are you?
It can help, right?
If you don't have dedicated IT, well, Blue Mantis has a solution for you. We provide provide staff augmentation, virtual CISO and virtual CIO capabilities, so we can plug in the holes and provide you with IT services and/or resources as you need.
Yeah, if you need to beef up your staff and you don't have staff, I mean, there's definitely some automation and orchestration that can be applied, right? And some of it is driven by AI. Some of these tools that are coming out now, you know, on the SIM, you know, security information and event management front, make use of user and environmental behavioral analysis, right? Which is, let me see what's normal in your environment and let me apply machine learning to determine the anomalies, right? That's organization. I mean, some vendors have had that and they're pretty well along in that type of AI, right? If you want to call that AI. There's other technologies that you can go in and ask the technology, hey, show me all of my S3 buckets exposed to the public that are unencrypted, right? There's technologies that provide some natural language processing that make use of AI, right? So there are things you can use. SOAR technology, right? How do you automate and orchestrate things? You see right here, we're using ServiceNow and Arctic Wolf, and there's some other tools that we use too to provide a more immediate assistance in isolating systems. If
Like
there
Sophos,
is, you know, yeah, like Sophos and things like that, right? So, you know, that's part of going back to the model, putting everything in that zero trust, you know, deliverable and identifying where those gaps are, and then selecting the technologies that have the appropriate level of AI and machine learning that's right for your organization. And if it's not, if it's too much money, you know, there's other options like managed security services, like Dawn said, Blue Mantis does a lot of that as well. So a lot of options there, Mario.
Yeah, perfect. So for me, this concludes my set of questions. But Peter, I understand that we have a couple more questions from the audience.
We do indeed. Now let's get to them here. Okay, here's our first question. We have some Meraki, some Fortinet. We use Salesforce with Microsoft 365, Dropbox, Asana for task management. Given all that, what's the path of least resistance to get our organization to zero trust compliance? Path of least resistance.
Yeah, that you know, we go into some organizations here, you know, Dawn and I, and you know, maybe there's hundreds of applications that the organizations use, right? And how do you get your arms around a lot of this? One of the areas that we like to start with is a business impact analysis, right? So identifying what are the most critical business processes, business services, right, to the organization. What's your business? What are you in the business to do, right? If it's customer service, maybe your customer service, your CRM system's critical. That's the lifeblood maybe, right? You know, if your sales organization, or if your marketing organization, your CRM is, you know, think about what those critical applications are, your critical business functions, dissect those down to the applications and the application dependencies, and then the technology, and try to understand, you know, what those critical ones are. And then based on those, what are the risks to the organization if they go, if you know, you lose the data in them, or if they go down due to you know, ransomware or, you know, something else. And start there. That's what I would do, right? You know, how do you start with the most important, like eat the elephant one bite at a time kind of thing.
Yeah. It's amazing how many organizations we speak to have never done a BIA, have never done a business impact analysis. And it's, you know, it's not a complicated concept, and it's not a difficult process either. It's, as Jay said, identifying all the mission critical business processes that your organization needs to conduct on a day-to-day basis in order to stay relevant and viable. Right? Then identifying the applications and infrastructure that are supporting those things, as well as identifying what the various impacts. I mean, the I in BIA is impact. You need to identify in order to justify costs. You need to identify costs of disruption to those business processes, financial cost, regulatory cost, contractual cost or impact, reputation, stakeholder impacts. You can put that into dollars and cents, roughly, doing an apples to apples thing, and then that BIA then helps you justify the costs associated with safeguarding those mission critical processes. And it also provides you with a roadmap as to what the priorities are in terms of what you're going to safeguard and secure first if those things are not already secured and backed up.
Okay, very good. All right, we've got some other questions. I just want to remind everyone it's not too late to submit a question. If you have one for any of our speakers, just use that Q&A box and we'll get to it. All right, here's our next question. Is there an industry standard process or an easy way to calculate the value of implementing zero trust before it's deployed?
Yeah,
well,
all right.
We just spoke about the BIA, that the BIA process allows for you to understand the value of your systems and the actual cost of disruption or outages to those systems should they come under attack and be disrupted.
Yeah, touche. I think, the couple things to piggyback off that, Don, is once you do your business impact analysis and then you ascertain your gaps from a cybersecurity perspective and you identify how to remediate those gaps, you're going to have a good sense of the cost of remediating the gaps. Another good way to sell it up the chain, right? If you've done a really good job at your business impact analysis and understand, things like your annual loss if you lose those applications, or if you lose those applications for a week, if you lose a particular Fortinet, you mentioned Fortinet firewall, how does that impact those applications that rely on that firewall or that cloud or that SaaS vendor? If you lose those, how does that impact, from a dollars and cents perspective, the ability to continue business in that business function? And what does that mean from a daily, weekly, monthly outage? Not only losing that application and losing any revenue that's associated with that application, but also the people who would, your employees that use that application day to day, who are now sitting there twiddling their thumbs, right? So, accounting for all that, and then, taking the dollar cost of how to remediate everything with the technology and so on, with the loss from the applications themselves. That's a good story to bring up to the executive leadership team and get funding for your board of directors, right? Hey, we're going to lose, if we're out for a week, we lose, $1 million. But,
right.
If we implement this technology, it's going to be 50K, okay, that's kind of an easy sell there, possibly, right? What's the likelihood of us losing that application? Pretty high, because we don't have protection. We're not on the latest, next generation firewall, right? We have some legacy systems that could easily be hackable, right? How do we modernize those? Maybe we're not using the latest and greatest endpoint detection and response technology, or, our Windows 10 environment is going to be, end of life or end of support soon. How do we get to Windows 11 with the new TPS 2.0, right? Just think it through like that. What's the implications? How do you sell that up? That make sense?
Well said.
Okay, good. Well, one of our audience members said, no, actually, the easiest way is having no proper cybersecurity hygiene at all.
Unplug everything.
That's easy, but not so.
That's right. If you shut everything down, that'll help, right?
Yeah. All right. There's a quick question about whether recording will be shared. And yes, it'll be available on demand. I'll mention a little bit more about that later. Then there's a question about, I hope I understand this question. Is there a process for defining zero trust on both classified and unclassified networks, especially when you have cross-domain solutions?
Don, you want to take a crack at that?
Classified and unclassified networks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the same major principles still apply, regardless of whether or not the network is classified or not classified. Even if it's not classified, there's still probably, it exists for a reason. It's still probably providing very important function for the organization. So we still recommend, following the major points that we spoke about before, and assessing those environments. Conducting a pen test too. We didn't talk about penetration tests, but if you haven't conducted a penetration test, then highly recommend you have that conducted by an independent third party to understand what, where, if there are any open doors, that would allow a nation state or bad actor to get in and to impact those networked environments. So
yeah, the only thing I would add here, when you're dealing with classified networks, you're probably going to want to look at FedRAMP environments if you're dealing with cloud, right? AWS, Azure. You're going to want to probably adhere to 853, which is the NIST standard, right? That, is the backbone for the federal government that they use on classified networks, right? You're probably not going to want to use a NIST CSF, and you're going to have to treat those environments in a much more strict manner, because my assumption is you're probably under a heavy regulated environment, right?
Absolutely.
And we could talk a little bit about, in the future, and we're starting to see this with the CMMC model, where any organization or vendors of doing business with the Department of Defense, right, or vendors of vendors now are going to have to be adhering to CMMC. Right. And there's different levels for that depending on what type of vendor you are. Are you, what kind of, classified or unclassified information you are holding. And then you have to apply an applicable, approach to that risk based on what the data is, right? You don't want to, just because you have a hammer, not everything's a nail, right? So your classified data is going to be, more stringently protected with probably expensive systems, technology, and services around it versus your unclassified data, right? So, I think of it in those terms. Hope that helped. Hope that answered the question a wee bit. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. All right, we've answered all the questions. Let's go to some closing statements. Mario, want to say any closing statements for our audience?
Absolutely. Again, thank you for taking the time to spend this 45-minute session with us. What we can tell you is our DNA is in cybersecurity, and we absolutely live this and breathe this on a regular basis, on a daily basis with our customers. I can tell you that the world is a really nasty place out there from a technology perspective. And if you think that you're somehow challenged in any of these topics that we discussed today, please don't hesitate to reach out to Blue Mantis. We'll be more than glad to help you in your endeavor. And so with that, appreciate you and have a fantastic day. Jay?
The only other thing I'd leave off with, Mario, based on that is I know a lot of you are going down the AI journey, and data governance is, an important element to zero trust. Think about what data you have before you deploy things like Microsoft Copilot or, internal ChatGPT, because there's a governance structure and some protection you'd want to set up in advance. Again, come see us. We have a whole practice around AI, data governance, and beyond. So, yeah, that's all I wanted to add, because that's something we're struggling with right now too, Mario, right? So
yeah, 100%, of course.
And everyone just remember that zero trust is a business process, right? It's not a tool that you can purchase and now you're zero trust. It's a process, and employing that process, it's a journey. I welcome and challenge everyone to embark on that journey if you're not already.
Very good. Mario, Jay, Don, thank you very much. Dark Reading appreciates your time and your expertise today. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Blue Mantis, as well as everyone out there in the audience. We certainly appreciate your attention and participation. I did mention there's a survey for you. Please, if you could take that before you leave us today, that would be great. And someone asked about on-demand, and I'll tell you that now. Within the next 24 hours, you'll receive a personalized email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. If you have colleagues and peers who couldn't join us today, let them know they can check out this event on demand. This webinar is copyright 2024 by Informa. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Dark Reading and Blue Mantis, and the individual speakers are responsible for content and opinions. On behalf of our sponsor, Blue Mantis, I'm Peter Krass. Thanks for your time. Have a great rest of your day.